What's up? What's up, family? Well, I'm in Times Square today, but I saw something in the New York Assembly that made me go, this is how you fight for reparations. Just take this, change the wording, and bring us our money. Get us that check. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, this was February the 7th of this year. And yes, New York is going through a little situation with the migrants, but this is not what the topic is about. It's basically business as usual in the House and the Senate. But I did like this regarding this bill, and it's about domestic violence. This is what the bill is about that they're talking about. And I loved the unity of it all. And I was thinking, whoa, we can make some things pop off if we are methodical about it. You know what I mean? Okay, here we go. Now, this bill is regarding domestic violence, and this was February 7th, 2024.
Page 36, calendar 265. Clerk will read.
Assembly number 8566, calendar 265, Mr. Meeks. An act to amend the executive law.
Mr. Meeks, a explanation has been requested.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is a chapter amendment to Chapter 695 of the laws of 2023, which expanded eligibility for victims and survivors of crime to access victim compensation funds. One of the primary aims of that legislation was to allow for alternative evidence to show the Office of Victim Services that a qualifying crime occurred beyond a police report. This chapter amendment seeks to clarify the process whereby individuals file for victim compensation given the expanded eligibility as provided by Chapter 695 of the laws of 2023.
So, what we have to do is change the wording because, people get uptight about this word reparations, knowing that all these other groups are getting it, but they get their panties in a bunch when the Foundation of Black Americans mention that word. They don't like when we mention the word, so we're gonna have to change the vernacular to make them feel good, but I don't care. They can squirm, but we about to get this check. Okay. But I was thinking, instead of saying the word reparations, let's use the word compensation. Okay, now here's the first opposition. And here comes the opposition. They're creeping in. Okay, here we go. First op.
23. Thank you.
Mr. Goodell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the sponsor yield?
Mr. Meeks, will you yield, sir?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Meeks yields.
Thank you, Mr. Meeks. This chapter amendment, as I understand it, did a couple of major changes. The first is that it tightened the process, if you will, of determining eligibility by requiring that those who went to a victim services organization, that victim service organization had to document that domestic violence occurred and that the injuries were the result of that domestic violence, as opposed to just a self-attestation, correct?
It goes beyond domestic violence. That is one form of victim compensation, but it also includes an array of other crimes that one may be eligible for compensation.
You have to be prepared for any question that you think they may ask. Just be prepared. Mr. Meeks, baby, he was prepared. He was prepared for all of them. Okay. Now, I'm gonna let you listen to some more of this. And he didn't get riled up in the sense like how we do a family. But, in his way, he kind of got riled up. But Mr. Meeks was ready for that ass. Okay, check this out.
One of the chapter amendments was to require the support agency for survivors of crime or the records of a criminal justice agency relating to that to then document that the crime actually occurred and that the injuries were the result of crime, right? That's bottom page 1.
Yes, that decision would be made by OVS.
Okay. The second change, which I found interesting, is that the existing law says that upon filing a claim for victims' compensation, the Office of Victims' Compensation shall promptly notify the district attorney in the affected county of the crime, provided, however, that if the referral to the Crime Victims' Compensation Board came from a victim services provider. The second change, which I found interesting, is that the existing law says that upon filing a claim for victims' compensation, the Office of Victims' Compensation shall promptly notify the district attorney in the affected county of the crime, provided, however, that if the referral to the Crime Victims' Compensation Board came from a victim services provider, quote, the office shall not make such notification. Why do we, as a matter of public policy, want to make it unlawful to report a crime to law enforcement if the report comes through a victim services provider? Don't we want to have these abusers arrested and prosecuted?
Thank you, Sir Chair. This is not an attempt to make it illegal. However, we recognize the responsibilities of OVS, and this would not become an additional responsibility for them to report said instances to the police department. However, they can take it upon themselves to inform said victim of the different resources that are out there. The fact that they were a victim of a crime, and these are the different reporting agencies that they can reach out to, such as a police department or a district attorney's office.
There's another interesting amendment in this chapter amendment, and that is that the existing law requires that if there's a, quote, request for information based on legitimate criminal justice purposes, close quote, the Office of Crime Victim Compensation must respond to law enforcement and share that information to aid in the prosecution of the offense. But then it goes on, provided that if the referral came from a victim services agent, then, quote, the Crime Victims Compensation Board, quote, shall not provide any personally identifying information or information regarding the crime. That makes it impossible to prosecute a case, right? Without that information?
I would disagree. It doesn't make it impossible to prosecute the case. However, the victim can actually work with relevant agencies as it relates to the police department and the district attorney office if they choose to do so in prosecuting a matter.
Okay. I had to break this up just a tiny bit. Okay. Then Mr. Goodall thought he was coming with all these little statistics on Brother Meeks. But he was ready for that too, baby. Now here's Mr. Goodall's statistics. I'm sorry, I was saying Goodall. I mean Goodell. Here's Mr. Goodell's statistics.
In her State of the State message, or rather her budget message, the governor noted the seriousness of domestic violence. And she stated that 40% of the felony assaults in New York City and 30% of the aggravated assaults outside New York City involve domestic violence. She further reported that roughly 20% of homicides in any year in the state of New York relate to domestic violence. So domestic violence is a huge issue. And the governor, in my opinion, properly identified it, and this legislature, in my opinion, is very much aware of it. The governor then went on to say, and I quote, absent prosecution, the offender's abusive behavior may continue and escalate. Close quote. Now, all of us know that one of the most effective tools to break that cycle of violence is an order of protection. Well, you can get an order of protection through family court. The rest of them require a charge to be brought against the abuser, and it's sometimes stalking or harassment or a simple, when I say simple, a non-felony assault. But without that charge being brought, those people don't get the protection of an order of protection, which can be very effective.
Okay. Those are his stats. Okay. Here is the rebuttal to those stats. Come through, Mr. Meeks.
Thank you. Mr. Meeks, on the bill?
On the bill, Mr. Speaker. According to the U.S. Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Statistics National Crime Victimization Survey, 5,813,000 plus violent victimizations occurred in 2019. Of those victimizations, 59% were not reported to law enforcement officials. NCBS also reported that in 2019, only 7.7% of victims/survivors of violent crimes received assistance from victim service agencies. In other words, over 90% of victims and survivors of violent crimes have a low likelihood of receiving necessary services or support due to non-reporting. Victims and survivors do not report crimes for a variety of reasons, including things such as fear of retaliation, mistrust of law enforcement, age and or other demographics of a victim/survivor, and the dynamics of an intimate partner relationship. I am one who is a staunch advocate in the space of domestic violence. It's something that I take really seriously. So much so, just here a month ago, I received a phone call from a constituent in my community. She said, I called the police on this matter and no one showed up. No one showed up. So I took it upon myself to call an individual by the name of Gabriel Person, who's a captain in the Rochester Police Department. I explained my concerns to him. He said, Assembly member, we'll be sure to get someone out. They got someone out to the scene. Lo and behold, they found a cell phone of the individual who was harassing this young lady. We connected her with officers that work with individuals in the domestic violence space, and she was able to move forward and push for the order of protection that she needed. What we find sometimes with laws and rules, they affect different groups differently. For instance, white women over the age of 55 living in non-urban areas with incomes over $75,000 a year are the largest recipients of these resources as it relates to victims of violence. Black men under the age of 25 living in urban areas with an annual income below $25,000 experience the highest rates of victimization, and they're least likely to receive these resources. So when we recognize there's challenges or flaws with our system, we as legislators have the right, the power, and ability to change policy. And that's what we seek to do with this.
Okay, and once you present a compelling argument, the other ones will get on board. They will get on board. And this is what I'm talking about.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Hevesy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very briefly, I rise to commend the sponsor for this excellent piece of legislation. I just want to address one issue that my colleague raised about orders of protection and breaking the cycle of domestic violence. Domestic violence is incredibly complicated, and while orders of protection can be helpful to protect victims, in certain circumstances, an order of protection can be an escalation in a relationship where the victim is, through coercive control of their abuser, not able to get away. So the idea that you should have OVS or any of these nonprofit providers automatically seeking order of protection is a mistake. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So I respectfully suggest that we not have OVS or the others asking for orders of protection or contacting the police, because sometimes that actually will make the matters worse and could serve to hurt the victims of domestic violence. So.
Okay, he's on board. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, I would call this person coming up, I would call him an op, but it's more like, Mix came so hard with the proposal. I'm not sure if he's with it or not. It sounded like he wanted to go against it, but he didn't see why being against it made sense. But he straddled the fence. Let me show you what I'm talking about.
Riley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a bill?
On the bill, sir.
So I was listening intently to the debate and talking about orders of protection and hearing some valid arguments on both sides of the aisle, talking about the pros and cons of orders of protection, hearing about police response to incidents that happen in our community. You know, when we highlight just one incident, sometimes we don't get the larger picture. When it comes to orders of protection, I remember responding to family disputes, maybe just an harassment or a misdemeanor assault. But it was a must arrest situation. But they were treated as an assault-free misdemeanor. Really no consequences when you look at it in the grand scheme of the penal law, whether it's an A misdemeanor, B misdemeanor, or a felony. The order of protection, what that does is if you have just a harassment case of an offender, which is a violation, but when it's a family offense, it gets treated as an arrest. Because otherwise a violation could be just a summons. But when it comes to a family dispute, they can get arrested and go through the system. What that order of protection does is that it escalates future interactions to make sure that it is a felony, contempt of court, violating an order of protection. That is an extra layer that the prosecutors have to ensure.
And then here come the sister bagging up the brother with their unity. And this is what you're gonna have to do to get us that check. Just go for it. Just go for it. But let me show you what I'm talking about.
Sir, Ms. Peoples-Stokes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill.
On the bill.
I find it interesting how we transformed a conversation about how to protect victims who are afraid, literally are afraid, into something that's about domestic violence. Even though people who are engaged in domestic violence, they're afraid as well. And so when you're involved in an issue where you know somebody is going to hurt you if you say something, of course you don't want to say anything because you don't want to be hurt. But there are plenty of women, tons of them, who have had order of protections, and then they were followed to work in Orchard Park. And when they got out of the car at 6 o'clock in the morning, they were shot in the head, dead. Another woman, order of protection. She went to West Seneca, to the mall. The man followed her in there and stabbed her to death in front of people. Order of protections don't protect you, necessarily. So let's don't make this a blanket issue about whether or not you tell someone that somebody's hurting you and they still hurt you, or you don't want to tell somebody that someone's hurting you when you save your life. And the system supports you in that decision. That's all this is about. Everybody lives a different life. Don't make me have to live the life that's safe for you in your suburban community, because that's not my community. Don't make me have to suffer consequences because you don't understand it, because it's not your experience. This is the experience people live, Mr. Speaker. This is not frivolous. This is important. It's very important. And I'm a little concerned that people want to just, sweep it off as another political opportunity to point out something the governor said that they agree with, but they don't like her response in this chapter amendment. That we need to stop doing. There's nothing frivolous about this piece of legislation, and I really want to applaud the sponsor for putting it forward and to having the discussions with the second floor about chapter amendments. Because at the end of the day, it's about protecting the citizens that live in his district, that live in my district, and give them an opportunity to receive support from the Office of Crime Victims without necessarily telling the police why they're doing it. And I know the police are supposed to be here to protect us all, but honestly, I've been around a long time, Mr. Speaker, and I personally know police officers. Some of them are in my family, and a lot of them I don't know. But I don't always feel protected by them. I respect the job that they have. I honor the job that they have. But in reality, it doesn't work that way in everybody's community. And so don't make us try to live in a life that's not ours. Allow us to live the life we have and to move the laws forward that will make us feel safer where we are in our space. We're comfortable there. Let us have an opportunity to feel safe where we are. Thank you, and thank the sponsor for this piece of legislation.
She said that. Sister ain't playing. That's what you call unity. She got his back. Okay. Now another op is stepping up to the podium to try to knock the bill out the way. But family, we ain't having it. We ain't having it. But I'm gonna let you listen to this second op. Okay, here we go.
Thank you. Mr. Angelino.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill.
On the bill, sir.
So I'm a little confused. I've heard both. Orders of protections are good, they're bad, and quite often things that happen in this House when they get passed into a law, police officers are required to have to enforce that. And somehow, some way, law enforcement always ends up on the dirty end of the stick when this stuff happens. So if there's no order of protection, then prosecution and law enforcement did nothing to protect this person from domestic violence. If there is an order of protection, now I hear that it can escalate domestic violence. I guess every situation is different, but the cops that are out there on the scene have to sort this out in hectic circumstances. And you want to know what really escalates at a domestic violence scene? The requirement that every police officer has to go through the domestic incident report form at every scene before he leaves and have the victim sign it. And I've been on those, one, maybe two officers trying to separate chaos, but the requirement to fill out the domestic incident report, we have to know, was your hair pulled? Did a phone get broken? What's the racial makeup of the offender? Are there children present? Are there guns in the house? All good things, but this form is two-sided.
The ops are really helping the case. I mean, they cannot refute that the bill makes sense. Like they can't refute that reparations or compensation. They can't refute that it makes sense. So if you all just unify and come through with all the receipts, I bet y'all can get us that check. But let's continue with this.
And I don't know how many different languages, but we have to ask these questions of the victim. A lot of times the offender is right there. We're trying to keep them separate in another room, and we've escalated it there out of the requirements coming out of this room. So I don't know what police officers are going to have to figure this out. Now, the words that I heard from my colleague that orders of protection don't always help. So that's going to be careful when you're in a position of leadership and you say these things, because it trickles down. And I think I was no on this bill last time, and I'll probably be no again. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, you go ahead and be no, my friend. It don't matter. It don't matter, because we got this. We got this bill, okay? We don't care how you feeling about it, because we're unified. We're unified. Okay, now here come another sister bagging up Mr. Meeks and Miss Peoples. Okay, here comes somebody else that's gonna check that ass. Here we go.
Yes, sir. Ms. Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the bill.
On the bill, ma'am.
So, when I hear conversations as I'm going to a number of public schools for Career Day, let's say for instance, and there's talk about young people, generally adolescents, they are the drivers of crimes. The young people, we have to do something about juvenile justice. And many times when I have conversations with them, I says, okay, well, what's going on? They say they're afraid. Why do young people carry weapons? Why do they have access to guns? Because they're afraid. In many instances, they're afraid to walk down the streets in their very own communities based on whatever the circumstances there are that are going there. Why are they afraid? Because they don't have anyone to talk to because we are defunding the schools and access to social workers within our school systems. We are also defunding many of the social programs, after-school programs that they have access to be able to have conversations with people about their circumstances. And then we want to tell them to rush into the police department to look at police officers to serve and protect them, in which we all want to be protected, but in many instances, we see time after time after time again when people call the police in order for them to come and help them from a loved one in a domestic violence situation. Somebody inevitably will wind up being carried away in a body bag, which recently happened in my own district. And so it almost sets up a situation like a catch-22, but we want crimes and people's fears and access to criminal justice agencies to be open and to be available to everyone, including the very same young people who are possibly committing some of these crimes. Going into Rikers Island, I will never forget having conversations with young people about, why are you here? If you could have anything it is that you want in this place, what would it be? Some of them said that they wanted to be able to watch TV later at night. They wanted to be able to stay up later at night. The same things that these juveniles are asking for in Crossroads, I should say instead of Rikers Island, are the same things that my middle school student who is at home asked me for. And so these children should be protected just like everyone else. And if we want to promote public safety, we have to make sure that everyone is safe. We don't get to have safety be a subjective terminology that only resides in a certain class and a certain demographic of people. Just because young people and people who are victims or who may have been other committers of crime, we always know and we always say that hurt people hurt people. And we have to end the hurt at some point in time. And I believe that this piece of legislation sets us on the right track in order to be able to get at the root of a lot of the crimes and incidences that happens in our community, and that is getting at hurt and getting at fear. We hear all of the time that police officers who are in our communities, they just want to go home. And many times when there are instances with police officers and people who are in the community, it is because some of them are just afraid. And so this particular bill, it really just provides the resources that people need when they are living in a constant state of fear to be normal, to be able to feel protected, even whether or not they're actually protected by the orders of protections or whatever the circumstances are or not. At least if in their minds they feel as if they are protected. They don't have to walk around in a constant state of feeling like they need to be armed because they don't know what may happen to them because they're walking down the wrong block. And so I want to commend the sponsor for this legislation. It is a very important step to recognize that we are saying to each and every individual who may be living in fear because of someone who is antagonizing them, who is harassing them, who is making them feel uncomfortable, that we are hearing you and we are doing something about it, and we are not being...
You know what? It almost sounds like it's a bill for reparations. You know what I mean? Because you can use all of those talking points for a compensation claim for Black Americans, foundational Black Americans, descendants of chattel slavery Americans, the ones that have, been here since the 1600s, those Black Americans. Not all of y'all, just the ones that have been here since the 1600s. Okay? Okay, let's finish up. Let me get off my soapbox and then let's let Ms. Walker get back on her soapbox. Okay, here we go. I think she's finished now, but let's see.
Subjective in our policy making. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Miss.
Okay, and before another op can get up and refute or oppose the bill, another brother stood up and said, okay, we're going to double down on this. We're doubling down. So you can send a clear message, and this is what I'm talking about.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak on this legislation, and I really had not intended to, but I think there are two dynamics that are happening right here, and one is how do we provide that safety? And I know from my experience as a former military police officer, when you're engaging in domestic situations, those are the most violent places, and places more often than officers will get hurt in any other scenario, just because of the context as been explained. When you move one partner away, the other one becomes anxious because they're concerned. They come together like nobody's business. So it's dangerous in those situations, but I don't think this legislation speaks to that. This is an opportunity where someone can come and get services for a situation that they're in, and I think it's premature to immediately invite officers to that scene without understanding the fabric of what's going on in the background. And they're not mandatory reporters, and that's what we're talking about. They're not going to be a mandatory reporter, and it provides a safe haven for that individual to come and share their experience. And rather than run through the door, and push them with force, we want to save. But in the midst of trying to save, more damage can happen because it had to be sought out and put in time, and there's so many moving pieces. So it's not about, in my opinion, cops doing their job or not doing their job. This has nothing to do with them. This is whether or not we're going to inform them of what happened. I think that individual, he or she or they, should make that decision based on the information that they have, and timing is everything. I can come in and say, hypothetically, this is what's going on, this is what has happened in my life. I don't have a second place to go to. I don't have anywhere to go, and everything I know is wrapped up in that space, so I need time to adjust. If it's immediate, then things can happen, but I think we want to move, at least in my opinion, and my experience as a law enforcement officer, is that everything has to work, and it's not gonna be identical by the book. There's gonna be some gray areas here, so leave space for the victim to be able to make a cognizant decision about he or she or they and what they want to do in that space, as opposed to immediately giving it to law enforcement. Thank you much, Mr. Speaker. I support this legislation.
Okay. Just stand 10 toes down on it, baby. That's all y'all gotta do for us. And get it. Just, come on, y'all. Get that compensation passed for your folks. Come on, man. You know it's our money. You know it. Okay. Okay. This part is just a little extra I wanted to add into the video to show y'all that they are voting on this. Take a look.
Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
The clerk will record the vote.
Okay. Before I show you the vote, Miss Peoples had one more thing to say. Let me show you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to explain my vote. I, again, am very much appreciative of the sponsor for introducing it and pleased to vote for it, even in its changes that have been made through the chapter amendment. I will say, though, as a African-American woman who's born and raised in the great state of New York, the great country of America, and the great city of Buffalo, I'm embarrassed about none of it. But I do realize, much like what I said in the quote earlier today, that separate and equal still is not right. It's not right, but we do live in separate circumstances. And even though we pledge allegiance to justice for all, it doesn't always play out like that. I understand that, and I'm okay with it because I think that there are opportunities for it to be changed when like-minded people get together and think about ways that it can be changed. This is one of them. This piece of legislation, this is one of them. Because sometimes people are actually afraid to talk to law enforcement about their circumstances because they fear for their life. There's an agency that's supposed to support them in that, and there's an agency that should support them in it. So again, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to support this piece of legislation.
And the verdict is in. Did the bill pass? Let's see.
Announce the results.
Ayes 131, noes 10.
The bill is passed.
The bill passed. I mean, this almost sounds like a case to end qualified immunity, because they're basically saying, I don't want to call the cops if I have issues because they might hurt me, which is a strong case for compensation, because that's what the foundation of Black Americans are feeling. We feel like, and we know how it's designed, we know y'all want the cops to harm us. You know, the people that's controlling stuff, who owns, it seems like, who owns all the cops. But that's how we feel. That's how a lot of us feel. I applaud them on the bill, but it is an All Lives Matter bill. It doesn't speak only to us. Anybody can get those funds if they are being domestically violated. And we can also get those funds. Don't trip. We can get them too. But, we're gonna get there. We will get there. Now, if we can just get some of that energy into reparations / compensation, we may have to change the wording to make it palatable so people won't get upset. But it passed. We unified and we got it passed. Now, if we can just get them to focus on a Black hate crime bill, ending qualified immunity, we'll be fine. We'll be just fine. Crime will go down in our community. We'll be able to build our own communities. Get out of y'all's stores, grocery stores, gas stations. Oh, skyscrapers. I see the vision. I see the vision. Hospitals. Okay. But yeah. Stay 10 toes down, family. Talk to you later.